We're like a little bit early, but I'm gonna just steal a little 2 extra minutes up here. The start of the presentation is that's bullshit. So no one's gonna be missing anything. Quick show of hands. Actually, this is maybe a good use of this extra time. Just to be really clear, this is like a technical talk. I had someone who wasn't sure if this was about like planning events. That's not what this is talking about. And I hadn't encountered that possibility for confusion until today. But no hard feelings if you like, oh, I thought this was the event meeting, and so you're like, gotta leave. Also, just because I'm very curious, raise your hand if you use something that you would describe as like an event bus pattern in your game. Okay, cool. I figured it'd be like some people who do, and maybe some people who don't or aren't familiar with it, so this is great. Let's get into it. I wanted to start the presentation today with like an example. I think it's helpful to talk through some of these concepts when we have something a little more concrete. So like, let's imagine I have this game that I want to work on. And I think maybe not all of us, but probably all of us here are interested in making games, and we have like a personal project, and we have some sort of like passion project. And I think a lot of us, when we make games, we want to bring something really authentic that people can connect with. And so like that's an example I want to talk about today. I want to talk about a game called Brand Turismo. It's the next evolution in immersive brand recognition and product placement. Here's a little mock-up I did. But it kind of says it all, huh? It sells the vision. There's a lot of details for you to dig in later. But we won't spend too much time here. So anyways, let's work on it together today. I think we're gonna build Brand Turismo today. In particular, there's a feature I've been thinking about. It's called the Brand Boost. I'll tell you how it works. So players connect their LinkedIn accounts and post about their sponsor brand by texting and driving in game. So if you're driving the McDonald's car, you type in-game on your real LinkedIn account and you say how good McDonald's is. And that gets posted to your real LinkedIn. And then that gets evaluated by a brand-trained AI model. And it rewards you boost in the game that you can use to speed up your car, which I think is going to be a feature people really like. And then another thing I was thinking about is, wouldn't it be cool if you could crash your car through rival brand signage and steal some of their boost, you know? So I think that would be cool. There's obviously a lot we could talk about today with this really good feature. In particular, I'm just going to focus on this last one because everything else seems really easy. We don't need to spend time on it. And we're going to talk about like, okay, what would it mean to implement this crashing through rival brand signage boost stealing mechanic? So I have some like code that I've like written out, and immediately you need to start asking questions about like what knows about what lives where in the code. And so let's say we have this like really simple driver class. We have a driver ID and a brand ID in our boost, and that's all fine. If the driver can crash through someone else's sign and then they steal some of our boost, there's kind of this implication that like we need a list of our signs, and maybe we need to know about the other drivers. So like already we're asking these questions about like, how are we gonna get references to those things? Do we have some sort of dependency manager? Are we gonna like assign groups to them and then say like, find all the objects in these groups? And so, you know, already we're asking these questions. Similarly for a sign, does a sign, you know, it has its brand ID, but does it need to know like which driver owns it? Like I'm a McDonald's sign, do I need to know who the McDonald's driver is? So all of these similar questions, and we like, you know, none of this is a big deal, but like we also already run into the situation where it's like, well, like if someone destroys us, before we try to tell the associated driver that we lost a sign, we gotta make sure it's not null, otherwise we exit early. And so like we have this reference that we got somehow still unanswered, and then we have to manage it and make sure it's up to date, right? Another way we could solve this is like, we could build some sort of manager that kind of has all these connections and figures it out. And again, there's some question about how we do it. And maybe we have a dictionary that we keep up to date, we hope. And we register our sign signals. And when a sign is destroyed, we check the brand ID and the driver and all these things. So if this is another representation of our game, where we have cars and brand signs, and also these things with the outlines are kind of like just systems, right? Like we're starting to do this, right? And it's early on, like it's like 30 lines of code. It's still very manageable right now, but this is the path we've started to head down. Everything is pointing to everything. We hope everything stays up to date, and if it doesn't, it might be really hard to figure out why. We're doing Pepe Sylvia. We're doing Pepe Sylvia. That's no good. Now, as a quick aside, there's a really great tip I'm sure many of you have heard in Godot, and this is kind of like a tip you can just like say to yourself when you're trying to figure out how should parts of my game communicate. So it's call down, signal up. Parent nodes should call functions on their children, so that's down the tree. Child nodes should emit signals, that's up the tree, and that's for their parents, but also other, I'll use the parents' local relatives to be informed of what's going on. It doesn't have to be local, but generally speaking, like that's a use case you're gonna see when you're, I'm connecting to the signals of my child to get informed of when things change. This is very good, this is very helpful, this is gonna be most of your use cases when you're working in different parts of your game. But does that help us here? Because we aren't really dealing with child nodes. We don't even know, as the driver class, all the systems that might care about an update when we crash to a sign. And there's just a decent amount of overhead to find the nodes that we do care about, to connect to them, and to keep them up to date, right? There's just work involved. And it's very fragile. There's a lot of opportunity for bugs if we don't think of every use case perfectly. And we're not going to. In that case, events are the way to go. I got a late title card, people. This is my talk. Thank you. This is my talk, Events are the way to Godot. It's an introduction to the events pattern, and my name is Eric. But let's get back into it. So here's the event bus pattern. Here's the general idea. The event bus uses observation, or the publisher-subscriber paradigm, to broadcast information. Generally speaking, it's like one centralized component that all objects can access if they want. There's nuances to that, but just helpful to get introed. It separates who is publishing from who is subscribing. So when we're connecting to like two signals, for example, if I'm node A and I connect to the signal node B doesn't know that I'm connected, but if I'm node A, I know both the publisher and the subscriber in this case, right? So that's what's different here. And generally speaking, this is a great way to maintain loose coupling and separation of concerns. Basically, let the classes, let these different nodes worry about their own thing and not get too entangled with what other things care about. So, call down, signal up. I'll say event out. Don't be turned off to the pattern if that sounds dumb. But basically, we call down to a child node. We signal up to a parent or local nodes. And then kind of anything beyond that, events should be at least considered as an option. You want to broadcast information out. If you don't know who cares, or if you have information that needs to kind of cross system boundaries. So one example is, if I'm a driver or an object in the game, a system boundary might be what's in the game world versus what's in the UI, right? And so rather than, hey, I have a direct reference to my UI, or the UI has a direct reference to me, we can kind of imagine there's a boundary between the UI layer and the game layer, and in that case, we can use events to bridge that boundary. So let's talk about using it in Godot. So, event bus as a pattern, it's language agnostic, it's tool agnostic. Godot does give us some nice advantages for implementing this for free. So, especially signals and autoloads. Signals, which I'm sure pretty much everyone here is familiar with, but if not, it's built into every object in Godot. This is implementation of pub/sub behavior. So you emit a signal that's published, anyone can connect, that's subscribing. That's exactly the kind of behavior we want in our event bus. And autoloads classes and nodes registered to be automatically loaded into the scene tree in the global namespace. People typically use them in the way you would use a singleton. And that's going to be a very convenient way for us to access our event bus. So I'm going to walk through some steps of what we would do to implement it. We're going to create an event node. We register it as an auto load. And then we could literally stop here. Like, this is the thing. So we have two events. We have a signal for sign destroyed, a signal for awarding boost, and we already have the things we need. I'm going to go one step further. Just this is a personal pattern that I like. If you, over time, when you add signals to one of these event buses, they can start to pile up and like be hard to reason about. A cheeky little thing you can do is you can set up these local classes where you can kind of bucket signals for categories of events. So anything related to signs or to drivers, if you wanted to do like a score category or, you know, like round over type information, you can kind of bucket them. And then that way you've created almost like a mini namespace for your signals and your events. So that's just something I like to do. And like, let's look at our updated code. So we're back with the driver. And so the first thing we can see is where we used to keep an array of all the other drivers and all of our signs. Those are gone now. We don't need to maintain those. In our ready function, we just say events.signs.signDestroyed connect. Same with the award boost. And so here we're signing up for our events. And then we have our callback functions on sign destroyed and on boost award. And so now we don't care where this information comes from. We get a callback from these events, and we're good to go. We've updated sign. Sign is a lot simpler now. Again, we no longer keep track of who our associated driver is. And all we do is when we're destroyed, we emit this event that say, hey, I'm a sign, I was destroyed. Here's my brand ID, and here's the driver who destroyed me, right? So now we've emitted our event. And in this case, we don't need the manager. We just forget about it completely, right? It's not relevant now that we have events. So we took this, and we turned it into this, right? A lot easier to reason about. And something that is not necessarily immediately clear in our example, but like the fact that our event bus is it creates an interface that's agnostic to where it's coming from, which means when we're testing things in isolation, if I have a car, I no longer need a sign to trigger some sort of sign event, right? I can use debug tools to trigger that event without having other objects as effectively dependencies in my scene. And so now it's a lot easier to just test your UI, test an object's behavior in isolation. Let's go through some quick pros and cons. So pros. We've created this layer between the publishers and subscribers. This means we don't need to manually manage or check references, right? We're not going to run into a null exception when something that we thought was there isn't there. We don't need to like constantly update some list as things get added or removed from the scene. We don't need dependency injection to solve those above problems or some other manager that is like very specifically focused on this relationship between drivers and signs. We're no longer constrained to the implementation details of an event emitter. And so before, where we might care about, oh, I'm a sign, I need to know exactly about a driver or vice versa. Now we just care about the contract of the event, which also gives us a lot more flexibility. If something about signs or something about drivers changes, we don't care as long as the event stays the same. And as I said before, this gives us some more flexibility to test things in isolation. I think it would be irresponsible to say it's all pros, right? It's all upsides. So, you know, it's cliche, but you know, with great power comes great responsibility. And We all know that quote, right, guys? And Uncle Ben said that in Superman. Sorry, his most famous line. So cons. So as the project scales, too many events can make the system harder to reason about, especially if they aren't organized. That's why I left in that tip about like you can kind of namespace, because otherwise it's like really overwhelming to look at a long list of events and know what things are covered or aren't. Debugging can be challenging. So in particular, if you have events that trigger other events, you have this kind of cascading event thing where there are, it's a little harder to understand what the sequence of execution can be. So it's just a thing to keep in mind, that it can create some complexity there. And I've never run into this, but in theory, like if anyone can trigger any event from anywhere, and you have like a bad actor on your team, then you can get some really weird code. So it just requires some discipline, like, you know, to trigger these events from sensible places. But I can imagine that in a sufficiently large project with a lot going on and lots of types of events, that you could end up with some funky event triggering. So I think it's worth calling out. Some other notes, I mean, I just offered like a possible implementation, but you can implement this a lot of different ways and have some different trade-offs. I messed around with a more like complicated event bus system, where you can like pass around event objects and then they can be loaded with kind of more information, and that has some interesting pros and cons as well. Didn't feel like I had time to go into that today, but I did leave a QR code and a link there if you want to check it out. But yeah, main takeaways, I would say, you know, as games are developed, there's often a need for disparate parts of the game to be informed of one another. And it can be very easy to manage at first, but over time, it can get really complicated really quickly. I think the event bus pattern is a great solution for communicating information to arbitrary parts of your game. Again, especially if you're trying to cross system boundaries. I highly recommend it. And I think Godot is really well suited to get this up and running. I mean, as you saw, like you can start reaping the benefits of this with one auto load and a signal that's on it. I think I'll also say, just as a quick aside, I think a lot of people can feel that something like an autoload or a singleton is like cursed and bad, which I get. I think why you're less likely to feel that way in this case is our events autoload isn't holding any state. It's just a pass-through, right? It's just this interface that two sides can talk to. So I think there's less risk of abuse from the kind of state management problem. But you know, with any pattern, there are limits. So I would say keep events focused on like major updates. Like you'll just want to be opinionated about like, hey, is this an event or does this make sense kind of local to a couple of nodes? In which case you can use the call out, signal down. No, call down, signal up. You thought you were gonna get me with that. You can use that methodology instead. And cool. That's it. I tried to leave enough time so we could like have some interesting conversation about it if people had questions. But yeah, I've got a couple QR codes and links. I've got my itch on the far left. I've got a QR code for this talk. It's just Google Slides. And then I've got my website with socials and GitHub and other stuff if you want to contact me over there. That's it. Thanks. Any questions? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the state management problem that this avoids by not having state at all? What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the critiques of using something like a singleton or anything that's globally accessible is that you can't it can be harder to rely on the state if multiple nodes or objects or whatever are interacting with it at the same time. So you could have node A write one value and node B write another value, and now node A doesn't know why it's a different value, right? With events, we're not really writing any values, we're just triggering these signals. And so, like there's nothing, if you have multiple nodes triggering the same signal, they're not really competing for some shared state that they might be like overwriting. So it's just not a problem. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself creating nodes within a seed to act as an event bus instead of like an auto load? And if so, when do you make the call to do one or the other?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Do you ever choose to make just a node within a scene to act as an event bus instead of an auto load? And if so, when do you choose one over the other?
Gotcha. So the question was, do you ever use a node within a scene as an event bus instead of like an auto load? I haven't really as much. I mean, I guess one way I can interpret your question is like, when do you want a node to like kind of just pass information at a local level? Sometimes I have, something that's like a parent node do that and kind of coordinate between a few other nodes. In that case, I'm not necessarily using it strictly as like an event passer, but I think in terms of like the heuristic, it's like if it's information that is really only relevant for nodes like kind of in the same space of a scene, then I typically won't use one of these global events for that. I can rely on local signals instead. But I haven't really messed around too much with spinning up like hey, this is an event bus like just for player information. But you totally can. Like I think it's a valid approach, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, one situation I've run into, I've used this pattern a couple times, love it, it's great. If you ever change the the arguments that go into the signal or whatever over time, it can become kind of like a headache to like make sure. Like I feel like the type checker isn't always like super helpful in like navigating. Any like strategies you've used to try to like maintain that, or just be careful and
Yeah. So the question was basically over time, when you change arguments in the events, it's like kind of a pain to maintain that. Yes, because there's not really a good refactoring solution for that.
In fact, I think sometimes like if you're subscribed to an event, but the signature has changed, like it'll just like debug warn or something along those lines if you get the wrong argument. Like, maybe somebody should fix that.
No. So the repo that I linked, one of the things I was actually trying to explore was to get around that problem. And so in that example that I had made, I didn't get to show it today, but the example that I linked, the structure there was that there was an event object, all events inherited from it, and then anything that subscribed used a signature where it just took an event. And so that way, like if the contents of your event changes, like there's some work to do, but then you don't have to go around like repairing all of your callbacks because they all just take one argument and it's always an event. So that's like one of the potential pros of that solution. Yeah.
Speaking of argument types, so you passed, instead of relying on the driver class and sign class, you just passed IDs around.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about that, right? I mean, because if it's just int IDs, you don't have typing, but that means you're more loosely coupled. How do you think about balancing those?
Just in general or with regards to events?
In event buses in particular, where you're caring about this kind of loose coupling.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a general answer I can give. I mean, because it's pretty context dependent. Yeah, I don't know that I have a good general answer, but yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the one thing I would say, yeah, with like what the events are that you're passing around, and Sam, you alluded to this a little bit, which is like, you may find that the information you want to pass around changes over time, and that's why. So one thing I run into in a couple projects is like when I want to update a system about like a player's health. That's an event that I find myself changing a lot because it'll start as like this is their new health, and I'm like, all right, this is their old health, and this is their new health. And I'm like, this is their old new health, and here's it as a percentage, so everyone doesn't know how to calculate that. And so like that at that point, I'm like, all right, this should be like an object that I'm passing around.
Yeah.
And so that's one trade-off. And so if you find yourself if there's like potentially a lot of information, then like maybe pack it into an object and just send that instead. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
You briefly mentioned using events to pass like state between multiple different subscribers to like sort of let them modify that and add additional things to it. If you've used it like extensively, have you run into like issues with like system ordering and like wanting one system to run before another with like connecting to events?
Yeah, good question. So I don't think, maybe I'm misunderstanding. I don't know that I've done the thing you're describing too much, where like an object gets like passed around through events, and then like everyone's like modifying it. I do think in that case, so I had maybe a similar experience on a jam that I did, where we were trying to exclusively understand the state of level progress through events. That ended up being kind of hairy. I think for some of the reasons you're kind of alluding to, where it's harder to reason about the sequence of things happening. And so that was a case where like in the kind of what we would have done differently mini retro about it, we said like, okay, like for something like that, it's maybe better to have like life cycle events that are doled out in a really specific order than these more like ephemeral events that get kicked around, that different parts of the scene graph that have to like intuit what's going on. I don't know if that helps answer, but I think the idea is like, yeah, like the more important a sequence of events is, then like that's when you have to be really careful about how you want to use those events and what those events, like I said, what the downstream effects are. So yeah.
So that goes back into more like being responsible with the events.
Yeah. And it just and like being opinionated about that structure, yeah.
I have a pretty simple question, I think. I'm not sure I completely understand the event bus just yet, so just to clarify, the event bus is a node that will hold the signals within it, and other nodes within your scene will connect to the signals in the event bus, and then the event bus itself will trigger each signal based upon whatever parameters you decide. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Cool. Got it. Yeah. Cool. And I think we're out of time. So thanks so much, everyone.